What's up guys? Today we're looking at the old as hell Sony A6000. Yes, this is a 5-year-old camera that came out in 2014, but it is shockingly relevant today. So let's do a deep dive and figure out exactly what this camera does, exactly what it's capable of, who it's for today, because it is shockingly relevant, and is it right for you? Let's get into it. Also, just to let you guys know, there's a link in the description down below for the absolute best pricing on this camera, so if you guys are interested, be sure to check that out. So you might be thinking to yourself, whoa, this is an old camera, it probably sucks. And here's the thing, I was really surprised too. It doesn't. I've used Sony cameras since the A7S1 came out in 2015, and I've been in love with Sony cameras. But this camera actually really holds up specs-wise. Specs-wise, it has a 24 megapixel CMOS APS-C size sensor, so that's not full frame, that is a slightly smaller sensor, but here's the thing, this thing still does really well at high ISOs. At up to 12,800, it is pretty dang clean and very usable for video. And for photos, I found this thing is good at like 4,000, 5,000 ISO. For a 2014 camera, that is bonkers. That is so unheard of. And this has the very good autofocus system that Sony's known for. Now, it doesn't have the new AI-based autofocus system that the newer 2018, 2019 cameras have. This 2014 camera does have the spectacular phase and contrast detect autofocus that Sony's known for, and it's very good. So if you take photos with this camera, it really holds up. This camera does 11 frames per second. That's really good for a 2014 camera. It does 11 frames per second raw while it tracks your subjects. You can shoot and it's tracking with autofocus. That's really impressive for a 2014 camera. By the way, did I mention this camera is only about $600? Even a little bit less if you get it at the right time. But all of this is just bonkers. Like for a photo camera from 2014, this is super good. Now video is kind of where I'm a little disappointed. Because it's a 2014 camera, for video it does 1080 up to 60, and that's not too bad, but it does not do 120 frames per second even in 720p. It does 60, which is pretty dang good for this price point, but what really disappoints me is that it doesn't have any picture profiles. Now, the newer Sony cameras, they've got S-Log2, Cinema 1, Cinema 2. This doesn't have any of those. This, you kind of just have a neutral profile that is kind of your video profile. Now this camera still is pretty gradable and it does really well because it still shoots everything at a very high megabit rate, shoots everything for video at 15 megabits per second, even if you're shooting 60 frames per second. So if you know how to properly color grade your stuff, you can get a very nice image out of it. I've been experimenting with this camera a little bit over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and I've been getting a really nice image out of it. But like, mind you, you really have to know how to color grade properly to get a really good image out of this, because raw power is here. Like, you can get something really beautiful out of this, but you have to know what you're doing. The upside of using something like S-Log2 or Cinema 1, you can kind of just throw a Cinema 1 LUT or an S-Log2 LUT and it just looks good off the bat. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find really good LUTs for a Sony camera that look quite as good as the S-Log2 or Cinema profiles. Also, those color profiles give you just a little bit more dynamic range. So I guess my verdict on this camera video-wise would be that it kind of falls behind compared to modern cameras because it's a 2014 camera, but it is still a very good value for what you're getting. You're getting spectacular autofocus, spectacular photo, and you still get really good video at 1080. However, because it is an older camera, there is no 4K. Back in 2014, 4K was like almost like a myth. Like, you just did not find 4K in consumer cameras. And I think overall for video, I wouldn't really recommend someone get this for video if this is your main video camera. But if you own like an A7S or an A6500, this is a fantastic B cam to supplement your more modern Sony cameras. Like, this would be great to just throw on a gimbal. It's a $600 camera that you just throw on a gimbal, you give it to your second shooter, and it gets beautiful footage. Now, another thing to note is that this camera does not have stabilization built in, as most Sony cameras do, but you can attach this to a Sony stabilized lens where the stabilization is built into the lens. But also, because you're saving so much money on this camera, you could easily buy a really cheap, like $300, $400, maybe even a $600 gimbal, put a $600 camera on it, and there you go. You have spectacular stabilization, way better than what you would get in camera. And also, if you eventually upgrade from this camera, you can always buy a new camera, put that camera on your new stabilizer. So that is a really good option if you are worried about the lack of in-body stabilization. But if you're somebody that does a lot of handheld shooting, very run and gun. I wouldn't really recommend this camera because based on my testing, you are gonna get very jerky and very shaky footage unless you're really good at handheld. And for someone like me who is very, very good at handheld, I do 80% of my work handheld. Even I was kind of struggling with getting like smooth footage out of this camera simply because it's such a small camera and it's kind of hard to keep steady because it just feels really flimsy in your hands. Where I do think this camera really, really shines is photos. Because this camera is so small and lightweight, like this is a fantastic travel photo camera. It is super small. You can literally, like, let me show you guys something. This thing is just about the size of my iPhone. This is really, really tiny and it's super light. I would say this is like a poor man's GR2 or a GR3. If you don't know what a GR2 or GR3 is, it's a really, really popular photo camera. And this honestly, like I think comes as a very, very close second because it does have a 24 megapixel sensor that's APS-C. You can get a ton of interchangeable lenses, which you can't really do with most point and shoot travel cameras. And let me just show you guys something. This thing is a machine gun. That is super impressive for considering how old this camera is and how affordable this camera is. To be honest, I'm thinking of just keeping this camera and making it my new travel point and shoot camera. When it comes to photos, I'm really, really impressed by this camera. Next, let's talk about low light. So what I found based on my tests is that up to 12,800, this thing is pretty decent in low light when it comes to video. Now, video, 12,800 ISO is kind of pushing it. So unless you have to go that high, I really wouldn't recommend it. I think this camera looks the best at 32 or 6400 ISO in low light situations. But when it comes to photo, oh my God, I am so impressed. Feel free to push this thing up to 10,000 ISO for photos and you will be just fine. You can clean up any little bit of grain you have in Lightroom and this thing is going to give you a virtually chroma noise free. Chroma noise is when you have pixels of grain where like you'll see purple and blue mixed in with your blacks, but you'll be free of chroma noise in this camera. It is a very, very good low light camera. So if you do want to just pick something up for astrophotography or just a B camera for low light photography, this thing is fantastic. And again, 2014 camera. This thing was really ahead of its time. Next, let's talk about build and design quality. Now, this camera is super tiny and light. As I mentioned previously, these things are fantastic as travel cameras. They're only about 450 grams, and to be quite honest, it's really not that much bigger than my iPhone, and honestly, it doesn't really feel like it's much more work than my iPhone. These things are really nifty and quick. You can just take it out of your pocket and shoot, and they're so tiny, I can usually just stuff one into my jacket pocket and just be on the go. They're also very, very durable cameras. One thing that I love about Sony cameras, they're very durable, they're made to last, and Sony makes cameras that I just do not feel, I'm never worried about these cameras falling down on me or like falling apart, the button stopping to work, buttons getting stiff or anything. Cameras are really, really made to last. And this camera is actually my friend's and he's had it since it came out. And I'm really, really surprised to see it does have a few scuffs on it, but it's working totally fine. I've been playing around with it and there's not a single button on this thing that is not working or kind of like janky, and he's not the type that really takes care of his cameras that well, so I'm really impressed with the build quality on this. It really feels solid and it really feels like it's gonna last for a long time. Next, the thing that I really like about Sony cameras is just the button layout. Everything is just in the right place. These cameras are already so small and I just feel like I can easily get to any of the buttons that I need to while I'm shooting just with like my thumb, just by having my hand right there. Like I just feel like everything's accessible through the thumb. I don't feel like anything is awkwardly placed. One thing, and this goes true for even Sony cameras in 2019, 2020, is that this button right here, this is what you use to record video, and this is kind of an unfortunate placing. They're super tiny. The newer Sony cameras, this button actually kind of pops out a little bit more, but honestly, Sony, if you're watching this, like, do better with this button. This thing is just so inconvenient. But overall, this is a really good button layout and it's super convenient, ergonomically built, and I'm really, really happy with it. And one of my favorite things about this camera is the built-in flash. This little pop-up flash is a lifesaver, especially if you're gonna use this for travel photography. You never know what kind of lighting you're in, and just having this little pop-up flash, like, I like the fact that it has like low profile, so you know it just easily fits into places. You can just have this flash pop up, and it's actually a very, very strong flash that has quite a punch. Like, if I don't know if you guys could tell, but that's a pretty bright flash. And yeah, honestly, I wouldn't even bother getting like an external big flash for this camera. That flash is plenty. So yeah, there's a lot of things about this camera that I absolutely love. The one thing that I don't quite love about this camera is right down here, this battery compartment. Now, the battery compartment placement isn't the worst thing, but what's inside of it is what really bugs me. These batteries do not last. Now, even the modern Sony cameras with these NP6 battery styles, I believe they're called. These things do not last. And I guess because it's an older camera, the thermals weren't quite worked out, and I was really surprised that these batteries are even worse than I remember them being. This battery, and again, I put a new Sony battery in because I just bought some new batteries for my A7S II, and this battery in this camera, I think lasted maybe 40, maybe 45 minutes. I was really disappointed. So if you are gonna be traveling with this camera or doing some kind of professional work with this camera, make sure to have plenty of these, but thankfully these batteries are super cheap. You can buy a 2-pack for like $15, $20. They're super cheap on Amazon, and I just recommend picking up a whole handful and just always having a pack with you whenever you're traveling with this camera, because these batteries are super cheap and they unfortunately do not last very long. Next, let's talk about audio. So it breaks my heart. This is an older camera and this does not have an input for an external mic. So the internal audio in this is pretty trash. Hey, this is a quick audio test for the A6000. Now, you guys let me know if you think this audio is worth using. I've done a few tests already, and I think it's not the best. It's usable in a pinch, but I really don't think it really compares to a shotgun mic or some of the modern internal mics that you see in cameras nowadays. A lot of the modern internal mics, I'm like, damn, I don't really need to put another mic on top of this camera. But unfortunately, these older mics aren't really that good, and yeah, I don't really think I'd use the internal audio with this camera, but let me know down in the comments below if you guys think this audio is passable. Personally, I don't really think so. And sadly, because it doesn't have an external audio mic either, then for audio, you're kind of shit out of luck. Like, you can record externally, but then you have to sync audio and like run your audio thing and this camera at the same time. It's quite a hassle. Now, this does have an external HDMI output, so if you did want to record out to an external recorder like the Atomos Ninja or the Atomos Shogun, those external recorders have an input for an external mic, so you could technically record audio and video from this camera, and then the external recorder will just sync them up for you internally. But again, that is a whole other piece of gear. That's a whole other thing. Back in 2014, that actually made a lot of sense. You would buy an external recorder, have this as your video block, and then you would have like external mic stuff running right into your Shogun. And then, that way everything was modular. You could upgrade your video block or your camera and then just then build everything around your Shogun. But in 2019, 2020, that doesn't really make sense anymore because you have cameras that have everything built in. So as for video, I have to say I'm not really having it. I love this thing as a photo camera. It is so fast. Again, let me remind you, 24 megapixels APS-C at $600. That is a fantastic deal. And again, this is 12-bit RAW recorded internally right into this camera. Photo-wise, this is fantastic. Video-wise, I'm not really having it with this camera, especially with that lack of external audio input. Yeah, video-wise, I'm not having it, but you guys let me know. So I guess at the end of the day, I have to say this is a fantastic photo camera. I just love the image you get out of any Sony camera when it comes to photos. Even though this camera is 12-bit RAW, the way you can just push and pull Sony images, it is spectacular. You can really take an underexposed photo, really brighten it up. The image is not gonna fall apart on you. You can really push and pull images. If you wanna do heavy editing to your photos, these cameras will not let you down. Basically, anything in the Sony line for photos is fantastic, especially if you're someone that wants a small, lightweight travel camera because you're just on the go. This, I think, is a really good alternative to something like the Ricoh or a Nikon or a Fuji camera. Like, this thing is small, packs a wallop, and you can really do a ton to the photos. And the lack of color profiles really don't matter when it comes to photos because you're gonna be shooting everything raw. All of that information you're gonna throw away and you're gonna kind of create your own look with this camera. So when it comes to photos, honestly, for 600 bucks, this thing is an absolute steal. But when it comes to video, this camera has a whole other story. So for video, I think it's really nice to have. Like, this is really decent video. The Ricoh camera, or the Ricoh cameras, however you wanna say it, do completely trash video. And this thing does really good video. So if you did want to just have video for funsies as like a side thing on your camera, this is great. This does really good video. But if you wanted to use this camera mainly for video, I would stay away from it for a few reasons. One, it lacks the modern color profiles that a lot of cameras have, and you're just always going to be kind of playing catch up or having to grade your footage just that much more, or learning that much more about grading to really get a solid image out of this. Also, the lack of audio inputs in this camera, so you basically won't be able to do interviews, really won't be able to do any kind of travel vlogging with it. The internal audio is kind of trash. When it comes to video, this is like, I would really think of this as a photo camera first with like video as the bonus on the side. I really would not think of this as a video camera first. Now, when it comes to something like the 6500 or the 6400, you could totally use those as a main video camera. They have mic inputs, they have stabilization built in, they have like the newer color profiles built in, the newer autofocus systems built in. This also has the newer autofocus system, so actually never mind on that point. But those cameras are just like made with the idea that people are gonna be using these as video cameras first. I think this camera was really made for photo first and video as like a side bonus. However, the A6000 does have a bit of competition for your money right now on the market. There's another camera out there called the Canon M50. That camera is pretty much the same size. It actually has a little flippy screen so you can vlog and do touch autofocus. Yeah, that thing has a touch screen. It's kind of spectacular. It has an input for external audio, and overall, it's a fantastic video camera. Oh, and it has 4K. If you're doing video first, I would definitely pick up the Canon M50 instead of the A6000. They're just about the same price, might be like 20, 15 bucks on here and there, but that's a fantastic video camera. I really recommend it to somebody that doesn't already have a video camera. If you already have a bunch of Sony cameras, A6000 without a doubt. But if you don't have a video camera at all, or if you have a video camera you hate, definitely pick up the Canon M50 for video. But if you're someone that wants to do mainly photos, or photos is more of a focus in video for you, definitely pick up the A6000 instead. This thing is a beast when it comes to photos. It's faster, it has faster autofocus, and overall in low light, it just completely trounces the Canon M50. Canon M50 is decent in low light, but not as good as the A6000. Sony cameras overall just fantastic in low light. So video, M50, photo, A6000 for sure. I guess at the end of the day, my verdict on this camera is that when it comes to video, this camera really lacks behind. But if you want to do photo, this camera is an absolute beast. It has a ton of raw horsepower under the hood, and it's an absolute machine gun. Great autofocus, great low light, and again, super fast frame rate from a 2014 camera. Total machine gun. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out a review on the Sony A6000. If you are interested in this camera whatsoever, be sure to check out the link in the description down below for the absolute best pricing on this camera. If you have any questions whatsoever about this camera or anything you want to be clarified on, hit me up in the comments down below and I'll make sure to get back to every single one of you. As always, like and subscribe for future content. Until next time, guys.